Today is June 20th, 2025. The Diddy case is entering what might be its final week. Stunning developments today, with the prosecution saying they're going to end on Monday and the defense saying it can only be a couple days after that before the jury gets the case and starts deliberations.
I didn't see this coming at all. So this is a bombshell of the strategic procedural variety.
Not testimony-wise.
But still a bombshell.
Yes.
Yeah, we've had a lot of witness testimony, tearful and the like, lots of fun stuff and interesting stuff, I should say, has come out during testimony. But here's a strategic element. As you said, the prosecutors said they're going to rest their case on Monday, and they've been sort of gesturing in that direction for a while.
They're basically
had summary
on time.
witnesses.
They're basically on time. How long they said the case was going to go, it's gone about that length of time.
That's right. They've basically stayed on track. They've had witnesses who have taken longer maybe than they've expected, but they've been able to cut time elsewhere. Yeah. You've seen these summary witnesses who are just introducing additional exhibits that they want the jury to have in front of them from text messages and so forth that they weren't able to submit through witness testimony. But in any event, they say on Monday, we're going to rest. And what that means is the defense will say, we have presented our case in chief. This is what we think we need. Prosecution will say, we have presented our case to convict Diddy on these three charges. Those are the RICO charge, the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and the interstate transportation of someone for the purposes of prostitution. Those are the three charges. They think they've got enough now to convict Diddy on those three charges, so they will rest. The defense, Mark Agnifilo, stood up. He's Diddy's lead attorney in this case and said, okay, if they rest on Monday, we'll need 1 to 2 days to present our defense case in chief. Now, that is a staggeringly short amount of time relative to what the prosecution has used since June 5th when this all started.
Not just that. We had heard weeks ago that
May 5th, I'm sorry, it started.
The defense had estimated they were going to need 3 weeks potentially of witness testimony. They are now down to a day or two. And I'm not saying that there's anything to read into that. We can talk about that in a minute.
We're going to talk a lot about that.
But that's okay. Like, you do your best and the case develops and you realize you change strategy on the fly. Good lawyers do.
I think that's what it shows.
But it's still a really short period of time. I want to make the point before we gloss over too much, that there's an intermediate step, which is after the prosecution rests, the defense has said that they're going to bring a Rule 29 motion. Basically, this is a motion to dismiss the case before they even put on testimony and without going to the jury. They're saying that they're going to bring a motion to say that the prosecution has not met their burden to establish as a matter of law that Diddy committed at least 1 and up to 3 of the charges for which he has been accused.
And you see this in nearly every case.
Every criminal case, you bring a Rule 29 motion.
It's almost malpractice not to bring.
Yes. They are for two purposes. Number one, can you actually get a dismissal of one of the claims, for example? In this case, they might lean most heavily on the RICO case. And number two, you all setting up, we talked about this in the past, you're setting up potential appeals.
Yeah.
You're setting up that the judge should have dismissed this.
And now, to be clear, what this motion is a motion to say, throw this case out before it goes to the jury. This would be the judge making a decision that the case is so weak as a matter of law that you don't need a trier of fact, which is what the jury is, to assess all of the witness testimony. It just fails on its face and therefore should be dismissed. This is a real long shot because there's enough here to, at least in most people's minds, at least send this to the jury to deliberate and render a verdict on this. So I think that will be unsuccessful. Okay, so maybe on the RICO, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. So assuming it's unsuccessful, the defense would then start putting on their case, calling their witnesses a day or two tops.
A day or two. It is just such a short period of time, given that this thing started on May 5th is when we had jury selection. We are now in the end of June. So prosecution has been presenting a voluminous case, and we've gone through it. You've been on this podcast. You've followed the case. Lots and lots of witnesses. Some of them do seem redundant, and I think that is factoring into why the defense thinks they've accomplished enough on cross to poke enough holes in this case to say, we can send this to the jury without presenting an entire another weeks and weeks of testimony. And I think what they're trying to telegraph is prosecution just doesn't have the goods. We have shown you that this isn't really a RICO case in the defense's mind, that there wasn't really a criminal enterprise. This was a jealous boyfriend situation. There was clearly domestic violence, but it wasn't of the sort that this is a criminal enterprise of the RICO variety like mafia cases and gang cases. On the sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, they think they've established that both Cassie and Jane, who are the two main witnesses for that particular cause of action,
were there voluntarily?
They were voluntary.
They were not coerced.
They were not coerced, and these were consensual relationships in large part, and they participated in the freak-offs willingly. As for that last count, the interstate transport of prostitutes, I don't think they're really fighting. They're basically conceding
because
that point.
There's no real jail time. I mean, maybe he gets a 6 months, but he's already served. We're approaching a year now, so it's time served.
Yeah, if the prosecution wins on that, but nothing else, I think they take it as a defeat. Frankly.
Yeah. So I agree with everything. I think that it's an interesting strategic decision for the defense not to start inundating the prosecution with witnesses here. What I was expecting is you would see a few days or maybe a week of witness testimony from people in Diddy's camp saying, look, I was around Diddy and Cassie. I was around Diddy and Jane. I saw a fully consensual relationship here. I did not see coercion. I heard Cassie say, like, the reason that I want to be with him is because I love him. No, maybe sometimes I don't like the freak-offs, but I love him, and it's worth it to me to maintain the relationship. I'm not being coerced into this. I can leave whenever I want. I'm surprised that Diddy is not, and maybe he's going to get one or two of those witnesses over this day or two of testimony, but I was expecting a lineup of witnesses from Diddy's points. He's got lots of people in his camp, lots of people that have been around him for a long period of time. I'm stunned we're not going to see 6 or 8 of those people take the stand.
I think there's a couple reasons possibly for that, and we're speculating here. I think, one, there may not be tons of people willing to testify in exactly that fashion, but I do agree that there are going to be some people who would testify that they didn't see coercion, they worked for Diddy and had a perfectly fine working relationship. I think the defense is saying that we've been able to get that out of some of the witnesses the prosecution has put on. So I think what was effective, and that brings me to a little bit to today. They had Brendan Paul, who is the accused drug mule, the guy who was arrested in the Miami airport carrying some drugs. He worked for Diddy for around 18 months at the end, from around 2022 to 2024 in that period. And although he set up the rooms for freak-offs, the prosecution put him up there. He said he did procure drugs for Diddy and so forth. On cross, they said, well, you were around during the relationship with Jane and you set up these freak-offs. You talked to her both before she would go into these freak-offs and after. Did you ever get any indication that she was hesitant or unwilling? No. Brendan Paul answered very clearly, I never got any indication that she was being coerced into these at all. They also asked, were you a drug mule? Were you part of the RICO case? Were you always getting lots of drugs? He's like, no, I got recreational drugs for my boss when he asked for them, and I've testified about that, but this wasn't a larger operation than me getting things for his personal use. So the defense, I think, believes that if they're able to flip in the mind of the jury some prosecution witnesses, that they don't need a laundry list of other people saying that.
And, of course, the risk that the prosecution has, the defense has, if they start calling witnesses to testify affirmatively, as I was suggesting a minute ago, that they never saw these things, those people are now subject to cross-examination themselves.
That's right.
How long were you around him? What did you see? You're under penalty of perjury. And so there is some risk.
Do you still work for him? Is he still paying you?
That said, as much as you and I can sort of hypothesize about what these witnesses might say, there's been a lot of really damning testimony thrown at Diddy over the course of this trial in the prosecution's case. And there are a lot of sort of unimpeached pieces of testimony about what Cassie, for example, that video still lurks out there. There's not much Diddy can do about that. It lurks out there. Also, we had the testimony.
That'll be sent back to the deliberation room as well.
They're
get to look at that as much as they would like.
There was also testimony that that the prosecution put on in their case in chief. Expert witnesses explaining why somebody in Cassie's position, somebody in Jane's position, would not leave an abuser. And we obviously know that intuitively from lots of domestic violence cases. But is Diddy's counsel not going to call a expert to rebut that? Maybe not. Maybe you don't want that person subjected to cross.
Yeah, I don't know. In the 1 to 2 days, are they going to bring up witnesses who are percipient witnesses who witnessed things and saw Cassie and saw Jane or worked at Bad Boy Enterprises, or are they going to use that time for expert witnesses? You don't really have time for many of either in 1 to 2 days, so it'll be interesting to see how they strategically deploy that. The other thing I thought about the defense's move here is maybe reading the room a bit. We haven't been inside this trial, but there could be a weariness. And here's why I point this out. The last few days, there have been a few juror hiccups. We've seen someone get dismissed from the jury and an alternate, get brought in. We also saw that a juror called in a couple days ago and said, I have vertigo and I'm not going to make it. And they had to cancel the day of trial. The judge said, we can't move forward. We don't have a complete jury. There could be just a weariness, a sort of feeling that the defense gets that this jury has heard voluminous testimony, and they're getting kind of tired, and they don't want that to turn against them. They don't want to make them more restless by having weeks and weeks of defense testimony, and they might read it as they think the prosecution overdid it.
Yeah.
And they want to get into that deliberation room and make.
And they almost want the jury to be saying thank you to them
Yes.
because you didn't do it. The one thing that I think 1 to 2 days rules out completely, which has not been ruled out now,
is Diddy getting on that stand.
Diddy cannot testify because there's no way that testimony would be wrapped up in a day or two, in addition to the other witnesses.
I could see 4 days of cross on Diddy.
Oh, my God.
I mean, he would not be able to get off
exactly
that
why,
stand.
why he's never going to take the stand, because he could never withstand that kind of cross-examination. Can you imagine? I would love to imagine. Oh, God. I would reach into my pocket for a good hard cash to get Diddy on that stand. If no other reason why, I want to hear him answer these.
You're 100% right, though. This now leaves zero doubt in my mind that he's not getting on that stand. There's no chance, because the prosecution could say we need at least several days of cross. So this is out of the question now.
Right. Let's start with Mr. Research, who writes, are the optics of the pattern stronger than directing a jury to see only documentary evidence? I say optics are greater than 80% to 80% of juries. So yeah, this is what I was labeling. Optics are one way, atmospherics the other way, right? You have the documents, you have the hard physical evidence, you have the witness testimony. But what about sort of, and we've talked about this in the context of a lot of these witnesses haven't really testified to the exact elements of each one of the charges. The prosecution has instead tried to create this aura of that Diddy's a monster.
Yeah, and you've made this point several times. Each witness is not responsible for establishing all the elements of a particular
or
charge.
even a single element of a
and that
charge.
may be dissatisfying to some people, but what the prosecution is doing is knitting together a case. They get a little bit of RICO out of, some of the assistants. They get mostly sex trafficking by fraud and force and coercion from Cassie and Jane. But all of the witnesses are doing different things, and they're just providing pieces. It's like building a wall. It's you each is brick by brick, but you're not going to get all of the wall in one fell swoop.
And I just want to carry that metaphor out for one more second here. So I did a lot of civil trials in my day, never criminal trials, but you are building brick by brick, but you're not actually building it during the trial. You are instead creating the bricks. You're getting these little evidentiary bricks from each one of the witnesses. And then what you do in closing argument, this is the whole purpose of closing argument,
That's
why
right.
it lasts such a long time, is that you as the prosecutor say, we need to build a wall, and this wall represents Diddy's guilt. Here's, in all the pieces of evidence that we need here's the judge has given you instructions about what pieces of evidence, what elements that we need to establish. Okay, let's talk about element one, that Diddy crossed state lines, brought somebody across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. That's one of the charges. Here's the brick for that. Here's another brick. This person testified to this. That's a brick. This person testified to this.
You are right.
You saw this document. You saw these text messages. Each one, I'm building this wall in front of you, jury, during closing arguments. That is what you're trying to do during the case, is to build the bricks, and then in closing, you build the wall.
You are exactly right. They're going to get the mortar out. They're going to have exhibits. These closing arguments are going to be extremely organized on the prosecution side to this point, because it does seem just like an avalanche of information. They want to make sure that jury goes back there and thinks about these element by element, and they're going to walk them through it. There will be PowerPoint presentations saying, element number one, here's the testimony that you heard about that. Element number two, here's the testimony you heard about that. And they're going to build it for them, as you said. Now, on closing, the defense is going to stand up there with a rock hammer and a chisel, because they're going to have seen that whole presentation, and they're going to start pounding away at why that testimony doesn't represent that element, why this testimony doesn't work, and they're going to try
why
to
this witness
knock
is not
down that wall.
Why this witness is not credible. Why this witness testified contradicted themselves during midway. So this piece of brick that they built this wall upon,
that's right,
is not really a brick that you should rely on.
But the defense doesn't have to knock down the whole wall. They just have to weaken the wall, because the burden of proof is so high. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution's burden is much, much heavier to convict Diddy of any of these counts, and in any criminal case, because they have to prove these counts beyond a reasonable doubt. All the prosecution has to do is knock out a brick, and then the wall is weakened, and you've planted a seed of doubt. And once one juror sort of believes that, they start to convince other jurors, and you may get an acquittal. Now, in this case, I think the wall is going to be pretty secure on certain charges, certainly on the interstate transport charge, more on the sex trafficking, and maybe the least on the RICO. I think there's a zero chance. We should prognosticate a little bit here, right? We're nearing the end.
Yeah.
I think there's a 0 chance, and I'm willing to say that Diddy gets acquitted on all 3 charges. I don't think he's walking out of court next week at all.
I totally agree, but I do want to wait until the end of closing to make my formal
That's
prediction.
fair.
Yeah.
Okay. No predictions now for Jason, but I'm saying 0 acquittal. Mistrial more.
I'm going to wait until the end, but it will be all guilty on all 3 counts. But I have a question for you. This is brought up by Enhanced Creators. I'm going to slow play to give you a chance to think about it. What do you think is the most damning piece of evidence of racketeering in this case? We've heard a lot of testimony from a lot of different witnesses. Drugs around. We have the inferential testimony that Diddy blew up Kid Cudi's car. You've got all the sex trafficking allegations with all the fellow Diddy's employees involved, Mia being an employee. What do you think is the most damning piece of racketeering evidence?
That is a great question. I think the most inflammatory piece that's sticking in the minds of those jurors is the car bombing.
I completely agree.
I don't know if that is the best piece of evidence, but I think that's going to be the most persuasive of a mafia-like tactic. Because I do think RICO, in the minds of most people, although the statutory elements aren't you need to be a mafia or a gang member. That's not what it says.
Yeah.
And so it is broader than that. I think most people expect to hear some car bombing, some arson. They expect to hear it, and it delivers that.
Carrying the gun to the Suge Knight meeting. Exactly right. That brings to your mind elements of RICO, what we see Tony Soprano do.
This is a crime
RICO,
boss.
right? Exactly.
And that's what they want to see, and I think that will carry the day on that particular charge.
Yeah, I mean, there's difference of opinion. Nikki B says there is no RICO case, So I'm going to read it for you, Nikki, but bogus RICO case. I'm not sure I agree with that. I think there are a lot of these walls that we need to build this brick on for the prosecution to get to RICO. I think all of the pieces are there. Whether the jury buys it or not is
and to your point, Nick,
to be seen.
I think it's the weakest. I'll be honest with you. I think the RICO case is the hardest one to prove that he is a crime boss. But I think you got the car bombing. I think you got certain threats. You've got the cache of weapons. All this stuff starts to make him look like Tony Soprano.
One more question, a really good question from I Like Your Face. I'm confused about this personal assistant job position. Shouldn't a personal assistant be allowed to assist the person? Is the problem they work for Bad Boy or Combs Global? No, the problem is that what the assistant was required to do was allegedly was illegal and was in furtherance of a criminal enterprise. So I have this drug dealing, sex cajoling sort of enterprise, and I use my employees, allegedly, to facilitate this. That's the allegations of illegality.
Yeah, Brendan Paul described this job as Diddy's expectations were he didn't like to hear no, and he wanted his personal assistant cadre to behave like SEAL Team 6. He wanted them to go out and do his bidding. That was his testimony. I think that's what the prosecutors want to establish, is that meant getting me the drugs I want, setting up the freak-offs I want. If that means committing crimes to do so, that's part of the job. Yeah. And so that's what I think they're establishing, and that's how they're getting into this RICO case.
So, Tia, we're going to leave it with you. Tia says, I get all of my information from here. Thank you, dear.
Oh,
you're welcome.
Thanks, Tia.
Love it. All right, guys, we will see you on Monday.
See you on Monday.